Welcome and thanks for joining us today on Leadership Log, which is a podcast on topics of interest to the Air Force Lifecycle Management Center community. And the topic of interest today is the pay pool process. A common theme and feedback that we've received from employees is that they need a better understanding of the pay pool process. And so we are in this series of podcasts to help them understand better how they're impacted by this. And we're joined today by a group of individuals who have a lot of experience in pay pools. And we're going to go through and meet them, and then we will start into our discussion. So we will start our introductions with Mr. Fredericks.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Fredericks. I'm the Deputy Director of the 66th Air Base Group at Hanscom. And I've been involved with the pay pools since we started on the ACQ Demo journey some years ago. In addition to being a member of the pay pool panel, I'm also work very closely with the pay pool administrator in preparing the pay pool panels, as well as going through the process throughout the year. And looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thanks, sir. And Mr. Leek.
Hi, I'm Chris Leek. I'm the Director of the Acquisition Excellence and Program Execution Directorate. So I've been a pay pool manager for the last 2 cycles. We'll be a pay pool manager again this year. So I've got a lot of experience, a lot of learning and how to actually make this work for the center and our employees.
Thank you, sir. Welcome. Mr. Sorial.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Sorial. Currently, I'm serving as the Deputy PEO for Weapons at Eglin Air Force Base. But I've had the pleasure of working on pay pool panels for the last 4 years, first representing the Mobility Directorate and PEO, then the next 2 years representing the Tanker Directorate. This is my first year where I'll lead a sub-pay pool panel myself. Great to be among you here today.
Thanks, sir. We'll go to Mr. Sawicki.
Hello, thanks for the opportunity to participate in this. So my name is Vince Sawicki. I am the Senior Functional for FM for PEO Digital. I've been on a sub-pay pool as a sub-pay pool manager since the beginning, since 2016. And currently this year I'll be the chair of that sub-pay pool, which then feeds into the pay pool manager role that Ms. Sowers runs for FM. Thanks.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Coleman.
Hello, I'm Mike Coleman. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for PEO BES at Maxwell Gunner. And I actually had experience prior to the Air Force moving to ACQ Demo. I was working for the Missile Defense Agency and was in the pay pool process there. And then, of course, moving over to the Air Force, I've had experience with the sub-pay pool and pay pool process within the Air Force.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Mitchell.
Hello, Jeremy Mitchell here. I'm the Center Cost Chief for the Lifecycle Management Center. This will be my 3rd year as a sub-pay pool member. In doing so, I represent my staff, which is predominantly an ACQ Demo staff in that process. The sub-pay pool that I'm working on or participant in is the FM staff sub-pay pool. Looking forward to getting into it again this year and looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you. Mr. Liebert.
Hi, this is Andy Liebert. I am the Information Protection OSF for PEO C3INN. I've been on sub-pay pools for the past about 3 years. It's always been an enlightening opportunity. I love the opportunity to be able to see how other supervisors are taking advantage of the ACQ Demo process and always learning every single year. So again, looking forward to that again this year in this conversation.
Sure. Mr. Lyman.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sean Lyman. I am the Director of Logistics for Fighters and Advanced Aircraft. And this will be my 4th year as part of the ACQ Demo sub-pay pool process. And I'm too looking forward to this discussion to see how other folks are working within the system and what we can do to continue to make it better.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Tillman.
Yes. Yeah. How you doing this afternoon?
Very good.
Oh yeah, trying to figure out this mute system. But as how you doing? My name is Mel Tillman. I'm the chief of AQR at the OL at Hanscom Air Force Base. I serve as the administrator and since 2016. I was the administrator up until this year, where I will also serve as administrator of the new AQ2 pay pool that's forming this year. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Cerny.
Hi, I'm Barb Cerny. I am the deputy of the 88th Communications Group at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, so I am at wing level. I was a pay pool manager for 3 years until the wing decided to consolidate their 4 pay pools into a single pay pool, and now I am simply a member of the pay pool. So I do have a lot of experience in ACQ Demo.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Mott.
Good afternoon. My name is Amir Mott. I'm the Deputy Director of the 88 Civil Engineer Group here at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So last year I was a member of our sub-pay pool. This year I'll actually chair the sub-pay pool and participate on the pay pool panel for the 88th Air Base Wing. Nice to be here with you, with everyone.
Thank you. So as we can see, we've got a learned group of individuals with a lot of experience in pay pools and sub-pay pools, and should be in a good position to answer these questions today. Oh, let's also meet Mr. Temple.
Hi, I'm Dave Temple. I'm basically the lead program management functional under the digital directorate at Hanscom Air Force Base. So like a lot of other participants, I've done been a sub pay pool panel chairman under Chris Leak for the PM pay pools for the last 4 years. And then I'm also been around long enough that I've actually chaired when we were back in NSPS. I've done 2 or 3 of those back when Hanscom was actually a center. So glad to participate along with the other panel members.
All right, thank you, sir. So let's start into the questions today. And I think the common refrain that you get from employees going into the pay pool process, they know that the pay pool process is important, that it has a major impact on them in their careers. The question is, who is representing me in the pay pool process, and how do I have a voice in that process? So let's start with that question, and we'll go first to Mr. Lyman.
Yeah, thanks. That's actually an excellent question. I think the real answer, the employee actually represents himself in the sub-pay pool and the pay pool process, and that is through their self-assessment. That's a critical first step that kicks off the entire pay pool process. So as an employee, it's very important that they take the time and sit down and write out, what have I done this year to contribute to the mission of my organization? And to do that, one of the things they want to try to follow is, we talk about the CRI, or contribution result impact format. And that's actually a really good approach for an individual to sit down and write, what is it I've done, the contribution, the result of that, and more importantly, what is the impact to my mission and to my organization? So that's a critical role the employee plays. And there's a lot of tools available that I think in the ACQ Demo process and the ACQ Demo training guides that can assist an individual with, what does that look like? What are some templates and just some examples that are really important, because it's necessary to be able to feed that information to your supervisor, who can then take it and work on that and build forward. So I think the first person to represent the employee, as I said, is the employee themselves. And then moving forward, that works up to the pay pool process.
Thanks, sir. And we'll go to Mr. Coleman.
All right, yeah, so I agree. And one of the things I always try to emphasize as I'm giving advice on the ACQ Demo process is preparing early for those self-assessments. So throughout the year, taking notes, jotting down in your calendar different things you're working on, different surprises that have come up and how you've dealt with them, keeping those good notes, and then treating the actual midterm as if it's an annual rating, so that you're actually writing down those CRI bullets in your midterm. And that way you've taken care of half of the year. And as you get past a midterm and you're working towards the annual, you only have to worry about adding in what you've done the second half of the year.
And Mr. Mitchell.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both Mr. Coleman as well as Mr. Lyman. So I have 45 ACQ Demo employees in my organization who I represent in the sub-PAPL process. And I can tell you that my ability to advocate for those 45 analysts is through their self-assessment. I know what my 45 analysts are doing. I know that what we have them assigned to, but it would be almost impossible for me to be able to articulate all of that in the sub-PAPL process while the panel is going on without those contributions, those results, and those impacts that the employees develop as part of this process. So it's very critical to have those CRIs well written out so that both your supervisor as well as your sub-PAPL representative are able to articulate that during that sub-PAPL process.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Fredericks.
Hi, some of the things I just wanted to mention were the communication between the employee and the supervisor. I think it's critical, and I think that some people sell themselves short by just filling it out and launching it, rather than having a discussion with their supervisor up front and maybe even during, and bouncing some things back and forth, saying, you know, what are real impactful things. The other piece is you really need to be paying attention to what the organization's mission and real priorities are. You know, what are the lines of effort in the strategic plan? What are the things that we've set out that we want to accomplish this year? And that needs to be, of course, in the contribution plan as well. But it's very important when you come up with those impacts that you show how you're impacting those things that your organization has set out as their priorities. So a conversation throughout the year would be really valuable. One last thing I'd like to mention, sorry, is the difference between results and impact. I've seen over the years, a lot of people confuse those things. So that's another thing to have a communication with your supervisor about. You know, the result of your contribution is one thing. Making sure that the impact to the organization's mission at the highest level that it impacts it is what you're showing for the impact, not just what happened because of your contribution. Thanks, over.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Cerny.
Yeah, so having been through many pay pools at this point in time, self-advocacy is paramount. Your supervisors are not always the best writers in the world. And if they have numerous ACQ Demo employees, they probably won't be spending the time that they need to on the write-ups, especially in good impact statements. There have been many times where we have read in the pay pool a supervisor's statements, appraisal on their employee, and have no idea what they're trying to get across to us. And so we have to go back to that self-assessment that the employee put in. And there have also been many times where there were not self-assessments in the system and we had no recourse. You know, we're not going to sit there and go back to every supervisor and employee and say, hey, you know, tell us what you did. Your record is what went forward to that panel. So it has to be in excellent condition. This is how you're going to get your raises. This is how you're going to get your awards. And if you don't care about that, then great. Don't write a self-assessment that means anything. But if that's what you care about, you had better make sure that that self-assessment is tight and written well in CRI. Don't rely on your supervisor to be that brilliant writer for you.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll go to Mr. Sorial.
Thanks very much. It is the question is, what could you do and who represents you on the pay panel? And certainly we've heard the esteemed panel members today stress the point of self-assessment. And certainly that is a great start. Great communication with your supervisor, not just during appraisal periods, but throughout the year, helps prepare them to represent you at the panel should question come up at the sub panel and at the panel. Also, good communication with your sub pay pool member, as they are your first representative on that sub pay pool whenever we're trying to level out and baseline the contributions from high raters to lower raters, so we can get an even keeled approach. So those are very paramount. There is some training on the ACQ Demo site that employees should take to help them prepare their self-assessment.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Leake.
Yeah, I very much agree with what folks have said. And just a couple of points with some emphasis. Again, we talked about the CRI. The impact should be the focus. The CRI, the C and the R should trace back to, again, the strategic goals for the organization. But when the employee is writing, it should be on good, hard-hitting impact bullets. And I can tell you, after being through two pay pools as a manager, volume does not necessarily convey the quality of the impact. Short, hard-hitting bullets actually convey much more effectively than a long narrative. It's much easier to comprehend, especially in a large group. And I'm also going to emphasize what has been said consistently by the other panel members: communication with the supervisor. Make sure that throughout the year, the supervisor understands what you're doing, that you understand how your activities are aligning to the organizational goals, so that you have those strong impacts that you can capture at the end of the year. And absolutely, it's important for employees to write those assessments, because we do reference those consistently throughout the CCAS process.
Thank you, sir. We'll go to Mr. Liebert.
Thank you. Yeah, just a foot stomp on all the great comments that were put out there today. What I've seen is, in some cases, some kind of almost like they were last-minute written appraisal CRIs. And that poses the biggest challenge for a supervisor, to be able to spend the time that they need to on each employee and give them each the amount of time that they need. And again, to foot stomp on all the other things that were said, you know, it starts with the contribution plan, making sure that it's a solid, well thought out plan, and then going through and continuing on through midpoint, taking the time, spending it, you know, on that 6 months. And then when you get to the final portion, it's just the remaining 6 months that you need to work on and maybe fine tune a little bit. But everyone said, work with your supervisor and give it the time you need. You have, once you get into that cycle, the last portion there, you have weeks to work on that. Don't wait till the last minute, because that is, when you're talking about advocating for you know, who's the voice, the employee really has a big hand in that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Tillman?
Oh, yes, I'm echo what most with all the panel members said, as far as my biggest thing, as I said, is communication. And what I do, I speak ad nauseum to my employees that work for me. I tell them to write down everything they do. I have them maintain logs, notes, it's stuff like that, as far as on their computer. And I talk to them quarterly about some of the tasks that they've done. And, you know, I try to, because in my job, we have a hand in so many different aspects, just trying to keep track of things throughout the year. Because a lot of times individuals, you know, they're working so hard during the year, and then all of a sudden it's like 30 days before, and they're trying to remember what they did, you know, in November. So I try to sit down with them, and I try to provide information. I really try to hit the midterm and really focus on the midterm. So, I said that's half the year right there. Then all you have to, if you do a good midterm, then you don't, you're really writing another midterm for your annual, essentially. So those are the things. And then what I also done is, as far as a lot of my employees are in another pay pool. So I sit in the AQ pay pool, but my employees are in the DP pay pool. So I don't have access to that pool. So what I've done is I do a lot of talking papers. So I prepare my pay pool representative that sits in that pool for my employees, and I provide them with information so they have the ammunition going in. Since I can't vouch for my employees, that individual can vouch for my employee, vouch for my employees for me, and that's really worked out well. And my pay pool representative provides me feedback. So,
Thanks, sir. Mr. Mott.
Yes, I'll be fairly brief because a lot of things have been covered, and what I want to foot stomp again is the whole idea of the midterm, right? That's a good sort of a practice round, if you will. The final is what really counts, but that midpoint is a good way to kind of get a practice round in. And the analogy of any sort of, let's say, a professional athlete or a very good orator, they don't wait till the last minute to put something together. There's a lot of preparation that goes into it up front, and doing that has huge benefits that it pays off. The last thing with that is, find someone that you trust. An employee can find someone that they trust and ask for a peer review of what they've written to make sure it makes sense, to make sure that it's hitting those hard points. That's a very good tool, a good effective tool that employees can use to make sure that they're communicating their great contributions. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. So I think we see that it's pretty important that employees provide good, relevant information to the pay pool going into the process, but we all know that sometimes that doesn't happen. So what happens within the pay pool when you need clarification on some of the topics, or you have questions, or maybe you need to validate some of the points? What does the pay pool do? What's the roles and responsibilities in that instance? And we will go to Mr. Lyman.
Yes, so that's actually happens quite often. That's been my experience on the pay pool. As Ms. Cerny mentioned, if there's holes in there, key is for employee to provide input. But once we get inside that sub pay pool, we review the employee input as well as what the supervisors have written. And if things just don't add up or it's just incomplete, our recourse is we pick up the phone and call the supervisor. I know the sub pay pools I've been on, we spend a lot of time going back to the supervisors and contacting them for clarification. They have an opportunity to rewrite. Quite often we'll have people rewrite it if they communicate one thing to us on the phone, but the written word does not support what they're saying. We will work them to get the correct rating in place. So what I have been most impressed with as being a part of a sub pay pool is how much time is actually spent going back and trying to get good input from those supervisors to make sure we understand what they are communicating and make sure we have that messaging, so that as we go through and we're looking through anywhere from 180 to 200 people in a sub pay pool, how do we compare between the different supervisors? And so we do take the time, and the sub pay pools reach out quite often to do that. I think that's actually a strength of the sub pay pool that people may or may not realize.
Okay. Go to Mr. Fredericks.
I just wanted to add that when it comes to this, we really depend on those supervisors, and we need the supervisors out there to do the hard work. Our supervisors have done a lot of great work over the years, but we still from time to time have people who aren't willing to make the hard decisions at that level, and they're basically passing it along to the pay pool to make the real hard decisions based on facts. And so I would encourage you supervisors out there to think hard about what you're doing. Make sure that when you're putting in scores and things like that, that you're doing the right thing, that you're, if you have to make a hard decision, that you make a hard decision, because, the pay pool will come back to you. And and we expect supervisors to be taking that responsibility seriously. And I know the great majority of you are doing that. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Sawicki.
Yeah, thanks. This is what's important is the communication, not just from employee to supervisor, but from the supervisor to the sub-pay pool manager. As a sub-pay pool manager, I ensure that I have conversations with each of those supervisors who have employees that are in ACK demo, so that before I get to the sub-pay pool, I have a really good idea of the contributions and the impacts for each of their employees. And we talk about all the write-ups, and we talk about how their employees did and the things that happened throughout the year. So I'd encourage employees to make sure they're having that conversation with their supervisor, so that supervisor can then pass that word up to the sub-pay pool manager. So force the function, right? Don't just sit back and say, well, I did my written input and I'm done. It's conversation is really how the sub-pay pools work, because you're reading stuff, but then you're talking about the impacts, and if the employees are passing that message up to their supervisors, and the supervisors can then pass it up to the sub-pay pool managers, the message is really clear by the time you've had those multiple conversations. Thanks.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Coleman.
So yeah, as a sub-pay pool member, I spend a lot of time even before the sub-pay pool meets, reading through all of the raters' write-ups and the self-assessments, and looking at the ratings and comparing to see if what's written supports the ratings that have been provided by the supervisor. And so then if something doesn't match up, or if I have questions, things don't make sense, I take that time to call back to the supervisors and ask questions and get feedback and inputs on what may or may not be missing there. So there's a lot of upfront homework being done even before we get into the sub-pay pool, so that hopefully we have less questions as we're actually meeting.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Sorial.
We've all stressed the significance of the employee providing a good summary write-up at the midterm and at the evaluation period. If you don't take the time to do that, it really sends a message to the panel that this is not something very significant for you, and that's been brought up. But if you do a good job of that, and the pay pool panel looks at the supervisor's comments and the individual's comments, over the last several cycles, we've actually gleaned more from the individual's inputs and called the supervisor to say, hey, there's this contribution that was written here that you didn't mention in your write-up. And then we get glaring, oh yes, they did this, they did such a great job. So again, communication with the supervisor is important, as Mr. Lyman said, to the sub-pay pool panel and the pay pool panel, as well as that individual making sure that he annotates everything he's done to begin with, because that can then reap benefits later in the process. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Temple.
Thanks. I also think it's important, just lining up on something that Mike Sorial just said, is with supervisors, it really helps to balance things and bound things. In other words, supervisors just shouldn't be repeating what the employee says. Either put something different, or if you want to add more emphasis, especially to what the impact of somebody's does it, because we really don't need to just repeat and see that the supervisor is just saying ditto and go on, because it doesn't help very much. I think the other lesson learned that I've seen early on in the process from the pay pools is I happen to have a very large pay pool, and I realized early on I've got a lot of geographically separated units. So even though it slowed the process down and made it a little more difficult, we've made it really inclusive, where I don't care if you've got 2 people that are employees or 30, we have every single division in the directorate is represented by either their by their division chief or their deputy at the pay pool panel. So it's all inclusive, and then you hold those folks to really represent their people. I think the other thing that we found really useful is making sure everybody's spun up is when we can do it, at least for new members, to kind of have a mock pay pool. It makes people comfortable and it brings everybody else everybody on the same page into the process. And I think the third thing, which someone already mentioned, was I think it was Amir, really get in early to the process. As a pay pool manager or sub pay pool manager, we can actually go into Castanet and see when people have entered their information. And what's really been helpful for me to do a process is as soon as I see that happen, if somebody's giving an unrealistic score, or as someone else said, their justifications don't seem to really match up to a real contribution, there's a chance even before the system locks, and sometimes before the supervisor even finishes up, to give feedback to those folks and maybe have them re-ricker or at least provide feedback to that supervisor and that pay pool panel member that, you know, that write-up's probably not gonna justify the scoring or anything, and you might take another look at that. And it just makes it easier than having to do that during the actual formal pay pool process. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Mitchell.
Yeah, so Mr. Temple just touched on this a moment ago. Supervisors shouldn't feel that they're limited to what the employee writes in their self-assessment. That's important, and it's important for the supervisor to take a look at that. But there are other ways as well to get information on your employees or on your analysts. So as a staff organization that I lead that farms out my analysts to the program offices, having discussions with the customers that we support, having discussions with the team leads that are leading the analysts. I think all of that is important. All should be considered, not just limited to, you know, the words that the employer writes in the self-assessment.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about pay pools and sub pay pools. Let's try and get a little bit better understanding of what that relationship is, and specifically, how does the pay pool manager relay his expectations or her expectations onto the sub pay pools? And we'll go with Mr. Leek on this.
Hey, Daryl, that's a great question. And I think, again, as it has been discussed consistently, it's about continuous and frequent communications. It's about being clear on being able to start with the LCMC compensation philosophy and business rules, and then layer on the expectations for the pay pool. And I hope what folks are getting out of this is that the expectations for the sub-pay pool are to really evaluate and understand the contributions of the individual on the position. It's not about grading a composition that's turned in. It's about using that to guide them and to fairly and equitably assess the contributions of employees on their positions and their position and scoring relative to other positions of similar scope and mission responsibility. So my expectation for my sub-pay pool members are that they will take the time to truly understand the contribution, going back to the supervisors where necessary, using the write-ups as a guide, and provide me with a set of scores that we can use to guide the compensation decisions based on that ground truth reality of what the employee's contributions were.
Okay, thanks, sir. Let's go next to Mr. Mott.
So one of the things that I think that the 88th Air Base Wing pay pool has done a really good job is making sure that there was proactive communication with the sub-pay pools. A lot of pre-training that took place, even sending out the administrators to each sub-pay pool, making sure everyone was clear on what the scoring criteria was, how the pay pool was going to manage what they received, answering any questions, basically drawing questions out of folks, Just the idea of a lot of proactive engagement with the subpay pool to make sure everyone understood how they needed to be looking at things, because there's many different opinions on what the business rule may mean, how you apply those things. And so understanding the pay pool's expectations as it relates to each component of what's being scored and how things are being rated becomes very important.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Temple?
All good points. I'd also like to say one thing I know Chris Leak does as the overall subpay pool manager. He's constantly having get-togethers and meetings with his entire group of subpay pool managers so that we are all on the same page, that we're talking constantly. We're also trying to do level setting within and kind of understand where we're all going, which proves out to be very helpful. If one thing, we're always talking and we can always talk amongst ourselves and then raise up any questions. I think the other thing that also I found out as a tool from talking with some other subpay pool members is in some cases asking each participant on the pay pool, at least for their division, to kind of create a 1 through N list of their top contributors. And regardless of grade or anything like that, we don't always use that at the subpay pool, but I think what it does is it kind of acts as a forcing function for those folks to individually look at how their folks are contributing and racking stacking. So if you have somebody that may be in NH3 and they're at the top of the contribution list, then you're looking at, that allows the pay pool to actually look at ways, well, should we compensate them more? Because if they're your biggest contributor, they should at least be getting an equitable salary in comparison with someone who is an NH4 and just not doing it because someone's of a bigger grade.
Thank you. So we'll move on to, if we can understand, so how do we get from the process of the subpay pools looking at the employees' contributions and then from that determining the numerical score or the rack and stack? How do we arrive at that process? Let's go with Mr. Tillman. Would you like to address that?
Okay. I think that as far as how you get to this scoring it, I know within our pool, we sit down and look at the preparation starts the moment we receive all the appraisals. One of the things as the administrator in the pool, my job is to compile all the appraisals once the supervisors are finished, compile all the appraisals and hand them out to my panel members. And then they do the homework at that point. And I remember the first time going into it, we all were blind going into and I was stunned by the amount of preparation that went into this as far as the note taken and all the information that came into the pool. So when we started the pool, we had a tremendous amount of information, and it was really just kind of talking amongst ourselves at the table and then relaying that information to the spreadsheet that we maintain in the pool that has all the scores, that has the rack and stack features and everything. And that was one of the things that I was, that how we were able to adjust and look at the appraisals, do the appraisals, meet the scoring and stuff like that. So that was how, that was my firsthand knowledge or work with it from the start.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Sorial.
Yes, thanks. The supervisor is actually the first person to see the employee's self-assessment. And from that, and some other things we'll get into, he assigns some scoring, the numerical score and the performance appraisal quality level, PAC-L. He does this based on employee input, the supervisor's own observations throughout the year, broadband factor descriptions and discriminators in the from the ACQ Demo instructions, and the expected contribution criteria. as well as the organizational mission and how well that individual's contributions are furthering that assessment. So that's kind of how it's done. It's assigned by the supervisor, and then it's challenged perhaps by the sub-pay pool as they try to normalize, and as well as by the pay pool, who has to, in our case, in AQ, Mr. Leak has to sign off that the pay pool is equitable and everybody was treated fairly. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Lyman?
Yeah, I'd like to go. Mr. Storial did a nice job of saying what I was going to try to walk through in terms of the supervisor is the one who provides the initial input to the sub-pay pool. What we do in the sub-pay pool, and I think we've addressed it a couple times just to be clear, is when you have so many supervisors providing input, we do need to normalize. So we will look across the entire organization and look across everybody in the sub-pay pool, just try to get the ranges and then try to work together to normalize how people grade so we can kind of assign scores that are consistent throughout the sub-pay pool. And as Mr. Leak talked before, we do get guidance going in from our pay pool managers. So there is an effort so we're consistent, not only in the sub-pay pools, but across the pay pool. So we try to go in with some of that understanding. The other thing to keep in mind is when we're doing the grading and evaluation, it's for this pay period, this evaluation period. So I think that's important is for the year we are doing the evaluation on, because sometimes people will have high performers, they're consistently high performers. However, this year they contributed as expected, but they may not have had the same level of contribution. So we always look at that to say, what did you do in this performance period? And so that's what we're grading when we read through those CRIs and we assess it against the scores. So we try hard to make sure we're looking at that information and then balancing across the people.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Leak.
So Daryl, I think this is a challenge of being later in the cycle. I think Rob and Mike have addressed a lot of what I was going to say. The pay pool really does strive to understand the contribution of that employee, pulling in all those factors, tracing it back to the mission impact and understanding the mission impact of the position and the employee's contribution on that to give them a score that represents the impact they had for the Air Force. So I think it's a diligent effort looking at that, and it really does, again, at the pay pool level, we're looking to level set that, not to make sure we push everybody to a certain level, but to make sure we're equitably scoring people with similar contributions and similar mission impact positions in a similar manner.
Thank you, sir. So we've just about run the course of our time, but before we close, I'd like to offer the opportunity if anyone would like to weigh in and foot stomp something that's already been said, or maybe add something that we may have missed out on. So we'll start with Mr. Temple.
Thanks. Just a couple of notes. I think, and just to cap off things that people have said, other people have said, it's just not based on the write-up. I know I've seen in a lot of cases that we also rely on pay pool members and others to bring up things verbally that may not be captured in the write-up, either things that they know about or just to bring up the discussion. I wasn't sure about this point. Could you elaborate on that? I think the other thing that happens a lot in our pay pools is if there is a question or if there is a comment or something, we can reach out to the supervisor or a branch chief or somebody else and ask them to expand and use that information verbally. It's not just all about the write-up. The other thing, and perhaps I'm giving away too much here, is I've always seen it, at least in my pay pool, sub-pay pool, that it's been a great check and balance, because if I've got somebody who's bringing in a real high score, like I've got an employee and I think they happen to be a +10, I don't have to do all the heavy lifting, because I've got all the other sub-pay pool managers who are looking at that write-up and say, that's a 10. And then they're actually doing self-policing. So I really don't have to act as much as the pay pool manager in that, because they've got to compare and contrast everything of all the pay pool records. As a matter of fact, one of the things in terms of expectation and that's a good thing for everyone to understand, is if you're a sub-pay pool member, you're just not representing your folks. I'm expecting you to have read all of the appraisals, and especially because if you don't do that, you can't do a compare and contrast as we look at folks who have similar ECS scores and as we do those comparisons. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Coleman.
Yes, I just wanted to emphasize, we talked about scoring and we talked about for example, the categorical scoring, high, medium, low. And in the ACK Demo guidance and training, there's a table that shows you the different broadbands and what the descriptors and discriminators are for those broadbands that get you to the high, medium, or low levels. So everyone has access to that, can go in and read those discriminators, the descriptors, and see how that plays into the scoring.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Soriel.
First, I want to thank you for your moderation of demystifying the ACK Demo process. And I hope members that watch this can feel more comfortable. Just in summary, to sum it up, it all starts with the annual process with a good self-assessment, emphasis on contributions, results, and impacts. Remember, when you do impact, think broadly, think mission impacts, and good communication with your supervisor, not just at the end of the appraisal period, but throughout. Keeping these things in mind, I think individuals will do as best as they can. So thanks again.
All right. And Mr. Fredericks, in closing, do you have any parting thoughts?
A lot of folks have covered great closing remarks, so I'll just keep it to one. And that's when you do your CRI statements, whether you're an employee doing a self-assessment or a supervisor doing an assessment, keep it concise. High impact statements in a concise format. When the pay pool panel's looking at all these write-ups, there's an awful lot of write-ups. And I'm sorry, I don't remember who said it, but they said it very well, that volume does not equal the best way to go. So please, brevity is good. Keep it concise and high impacting. Over.
Well, thanks very much. I think, so we've answered the question, who advocates for the employees during the pay pool process? It sounds like a great many people do, starting with the employee himself or herself. So thank you very much for joining us today on Leadership Log and helping propel this discussion forward and demystify the pay pool process. Thanks very much.